Hello there, you're watching the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the historian and author Kate Williams and the PR consultant Alex Deane. So a very good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
So let's take a look then at what's on the front pages. And cybercrime makes the front of the Eye, which says vital public sector services were targeted more than 400 times in 3 years. The Metro goes with Jeremy Corbyn denying he ever promised to write off student debt during Labour's election campaign. As does the Mail, calling it Corbyn's student debt humiliation. The Guardian carries a warning from doctors about the growing numbers of deaths from alcohol, with one senior medical figure accusing the government of inaction over the crisis. While the Mirror says detectives investigating the disappearance of Ben Needham in Greece 26 years ago have found traces of blood on his toy car. The Times has an investigation into an alleged fake awards and honours scam that it says is exploiting the good name of Oxford University. The Financial Times leads with 2 Wall Street bankers seeing their shares rise by a combined $314 million after Donald Trump's win. The Daily Telegraph says NHS officials have ordered a review into plans to send the least sick patients away from A&E departments amid fears that lives are being put at risk. While the Star has another story about the reality TV show Love Island. Though I think they'll run out of material soon.
We didn't pick that story.
It's the end of the series soon, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, Kate Williams and Alex Deane here.
We haven't got a spot on the next show,
I don't think I'm being booked by Love Island, no.
That would be a spoiler. You turned to the Daily Telegraph to kick off, and their main story suggesting that is it a pilot scheme of a plan to divert the least sick people away from A&E is perhaps being looked at again?
Well, this is a scheme. Really, we know our A&Es are completely overloaded, and as we approach winter with our increasingly ageing population, the very challenging health problems that so many of us have, the A&Es are completely overloaded. So one solution was the idea that there would be GPs stationed at casualty units to weed out the less sick patients. But of course there is this concern that people go to A&E and they might not immediately seem ill, desperately ill, but they may have something life-threatening. There's an example of one gentleman who was turned away from the pilot scheme and then died just a few days later. So there has to be some review of this about what exactly is going to happen, because clearly A&E is overloaded with all kinds of people, sometimes who are repeat users who don't need it. But within that we have to work out exactly who is needing it, and that is a very complicated job.
And it does say that NHS England have commissioned a £1 million
They're obviously very concerned.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't work out quite where this was coming from, because one of the reasons we're told A&E is overloaded is that people can't get into their GP so much. They were going to A&E with problems that they would otherwise go to their GP for. So it seemed weird to me to suggest the solution would be to move GPs and to put them in A&E departments.
Because they encourage people to go.
Well, because if one resource is being depleted already and there's not enough of it available, why move more of that resource to the place that's being stretched? But it does to me, I'm not so sold on the idea that it's going to harm patient well-being, because of course many people will go to A&E or could go to their GP, and I don't see any suggestion that a GP is worse at diagnosing something that's not obvious immediately than A&E would be. I don't see that at all. Where I do potentially see an interesting issue is the 3 tests that government's looking at. One is GPs actually in A&E. The second is having them kind of next to A&E, which either means, I presume, having new buildings or acquiring new land or new development within the healthcare system, or the triage system, location unexplained, where they say sometimes you go to X and sometimes you go to Y. It just sounds needlessly complicated. And I mean, given that A&E, we agree, is overloaded already, involving GPs and encouraging people to use their GPs seems sensible, but the physical location of the GP doesn't seem like the right solution to me.
I mean, absolutely. I think any GP can triage brilliantly, but the problem is that they're going to be under pressure to perhaps try and. But
that's the same as A&E, right?
People out. No, I know. No, exactly. I mean, the GP, if they were to be in A&E, I agree with you.
The same pressure.
Yes, but yes, I mean, clearly we need urgent engagement with our healthcare, and too many of us are going to A&E. I'm sure many viewers are thinking that the time they went to A&E with something, there were an awful lot of people in there who didn't look like they needed it, and it is almost impossible. But clearly we need
usage
urgent.
Has surged.
Well, yes, and this winter we did see all sorts of problems, didn't we? Of pressures on lots of A&E departments.
And ambulances backing up. And when you talk to doctors who trained in the 1970s, they say the complete contrast between their surgeries then and surgeries you have now.
Because people didn't go in the same way.
We also have more have more obesity, more diabetes, more child
People living
obesity,
longer.
more people living longer. We are perhaps talking more about mental health issues. There's huge amounts more conditions than ever there was. It was discussed or engaged in the 70s, and a lot more. When you think 1 in 2 of us get cancer in our lives, that is a huge statistic, and those people, this is long-term care for a huge amount of time. I mean, we are an unhealthy nation.
And just moving on, that reflected on the front of the Guardian, hasn't it? Because doctors are warning about a rise in alcohol deaths, and they're saying the government is accused of inaction in the face of avoidable public health crisis.
It's a funny one for me, because when people say an avoidable public health crisis, I don't know quite what they mean. Of course, I don't mean to be crass. In the end, we all die of something. So if we manage to fix one problem...
Not us.
I'm pretty sure we will all die. Actually, chances of that are 100% that we will die. So given that we are trying hard to fix as many things as we can, and of course cancer being the main target, but every condition is in theory at least treatable and preventable to some degree, if we do better in many other healthcare areas, then those things that people choose to do are likely to grow as an area of health concern. But there is, on the other hand, the free adult choice to have a drink. And my concern is that if people say, blame this on alcohol rather than individual choice, in the end, and blame this on government rather than individual choice, what you wind up doing is taxing the thing that's of concern. And that's regressive if you do it very quickly and you ramp it up.
Is it just about taxing, though, or is it putting out public health messages that
I think
votes will cut through?
In the end, it always winds up with tax.
But I think
the poor wind up paying most for it.
But there is a very fascinating point here that liver disease are one of our biggest killers, one we don't always think about, because we have a lot of coverage of breast cancer and various diseases. Maybe we don't get enough of liver disease.
Cirrhosis,
it has risen by 400% since 1970, and apparently 62,000 years of working life are lost every year because of it. And there's been a lot of coverage in some of the newspapers about how we are drinking more, and we are drinking more, much more in middle-class, middle-aged drinkers are drinking much, much more, and retired drinkers and young people as well, that maybe there is an argument for perhaps some more public health engagement. I know that the government's brought down the units. They've brought down the units of what they've deemed safe quite recently, but perhaps needs more research into those as well.
It's a bit like, having enough laws that go flouted means the law is an ass because no one respects it anymore. The number of units that we were recommended to have in a week bore no real resemblance to what people were drinking anyway. So it was a bit of a farce, and no one took it that seriously, no offence to the people involved in public health. Then, of course, bringing it down just makes a bit more of a mockery of it, and people take it less seriously. If it's going to work, it's got to be an educational process over time, rather than telling people, you're totally wrong, basically don't do it. Because the more you do that, the more people will ignore you.
When you go, do you think that there is a habit of binge drinking in this country, in the sense that in lots of other countries there isn't? That lots of us, there's a good chunk of that, and part of that, I think, is that we're a bit more puritanical. The French grow up drinking a little bit of red wine at the dinner table with their parents, and when they're knee-high to a baguette. An orange juice, and you can drink an orange juice in a French pub without feeling
weird. But we also don't have cafe culture in the same way, so they might sit out and not drink, whereas we do. If you're going out in a city centre in the UK, you're going to have a drink.
And there is a I think sometimes in the UK, the synonymous "I had fun" with "I got really drunk," with "I got completely drunk," and I mean, I think we are seeing changes in student culture. Students have less and less money, and obviously alcohol is expensive. But there is this question about how, and teetotalers are very unpopular. Did you know what Agatha Christie drank because she was teetotal instead of that?
What, coloured tea?
She drank double cream, so perhaps that's all we should be drinking instead.
Blimey.
Perhaps
not
double
very
cream.
Refreshing, no. I wouldn't say. Let's quickly move on to the Telegraph. You've got a number of stories that have taken your interest. Here's one about trade talks with America and what some of the sticking points might potentially be.
So it looks like trade with the US, as and when we leave the EU, is going to be a top priority for the UK. No surprise, they're our biggest market and we're their biggest market. But one of the sticking points is going to be about how they treat foodstuffs. Not only beef, but as featured here on the front of the Telegraph, chicken, which in the United States they wash through chlorine. That sounds immediately alarm bells to most British people. Of course, if you visit the States, as many of us have, you will eat this kind of food. You will eat hormone-injected beef, you will eat chlorine-washed chicken, and you're fine. Moreover, the European Food Safety Authority says it's fine.
Even though there's an EU ban?
No, it's banned in the EU, even though the EU Food Safety Authority says that it's safe. So that seems to be one of the things that is going to be challenged. the US is one of the cheapest sources of foodstuffs across the board. So, there's a kind of consumer benefit point from having low or no tariffs against the States to get cheaper stuff, and food will be in and amongst it. But I would hope, in agricultural terms, we'd be buying British anyway, not because there's a tariff against Americans, but just because we want to support our industry.
And this article implies that there is a cabinet split over this issue. So, this is the issue over one product. It does give you another example of how complicated.
Well, things are very complicated, and of course we know there can't be. If there was to be, obviously we have about 20% of our exports go to America, 44% go to the EU. If we have an agreement with America, there are things they're going to want back, and access to our food industry is one of them. And there's going to be complicated questions about if we're making chicken items, and we can't then export them to the EU because they'll have this chicken in them. But also there's two points that apparently America wants. Is number one, relaxation of our food standards, and number two, there is access to our healthcare system and access to engaging with that in a commercial way. And these two are big sticking points. Not only, but clearly very interesting between two Leave cabinet ministers here. Dr. Fox is saying it's fine. Boris Johnson is saying fine. Michael Gove, who's now the Environment Secretary, is saying he thinks that food standards should be remained as they are. So this really underpins what say Stephen Bullock, the former negotiator, said. It's insanely complex, Brexit. And we're supposed to have finished it. We're supposed to have got it all organised by October 2018, which basically, because everyone's on holiday. No, it's March 2019, but it has to be October 2018. And because everyone's now on holiday, apart from us three, the entirety of Parliament's on holiday, nothing's going to really start till next year. And so this underpins how many hugely complex issues are.
I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to get it done. But I think even harder than the chicken issue on the States front will be genetic modification, which is unlawful in the whole of the EU except for test purposes, but is absolutely commonplace in the US.
Yeah, and plenty for us to talk about, unless we go on holiday, of course, at some point. Still to come after the break, the government minister who's declared war on modern architecture. That's coming up. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me tonight, historian and author Kate Williams and the PR consultant Alex Deane. And Jeremy Corbyn has made the front of the Daily Mail tomorrow, their main story down there at the bottom. Corbyn's student debt humiliation. Why do they think he's humiliated here?
Because not only has he said that he didn't mean to imply that he would repeal student debt and write off that debt which existed, which I think was widely understood to be what he meant, but that he had no idea how much it would cost to do so. You know who he reminds me of most in saying this? It's a very comparison people may not like. When Donald Trump said he hadn't quite understood what Obamacare was until he got into office, that it's very like that.
But to remind people how this came out, it was an interview in the NME, wasn't it? And I think he talked about the burden of student debt, and he said we'll deal with it. He didn't actually explicitly explain what that meant.
The phrase "deal with it" does not necessarily mean writing all of student debt off. And I mean we've seen. I mean, there have been lots of lies. For example, the 350 million to the NHS has been exposed as a complete lie.
By whom?
It's not going to happen.
We haven't left the EU yet, and it wasn't a pledge by our government or someone who wanted to be in government.
But the next morning, Nigel Farage said it's not going to happen, and many MPs have said it's not.
Nigel Farage wasn't part of the Vote Leave campaign which said that. So who are you saying?
But then you have Johnson and people saying we never said it.
People earnestly. The point about that message was, and you always bring that up. It's very strange because repeatedly.
Well, I haven't seen it since January, so it can't be always bringing it up.
No, but I also watch TV.
But I don't talk about leave otherwise. I don't know why you're accusing me of always bringing something up.
Okay, well, I've heard you say it several
So
times.
anyway, going back to the student.
So have many people.
The point about that issue was that when we leave the European Union, we will be able to decide how we spend our own money. We could spend that money on the NHS. We could choose to spend it another way. But to call it a lie is totally false, and you should stop doing it.
OK, shall we move back to the student issue, though? Yeah. I mean, it wasn't in Labour's manifesto, was it? So
I think Jeremy Corbyn clearly got a big boost from student voting, and many more young people voted for Labour than they had done in 2015 or in 2010. And in part, I think that must be because they thought that they would have their if they were going to be students, that they were not going to be charged student fees, and more contentiously, if they were already students with debt, then they would have that debt written off, which would cost quite rightly, the Mail says, about £100 billion, more than twice as much as we spend on defence.
The thing is, though, so essentially, Jeremy Corbyn, I think a lot of people said he won because of the student vote. There were two reasons, I think. People were sick of austerity. That's been clear. So we see the Tory government have abandoned the whole question of austerity. And Theresa May said, if you want my Brexit, you vote for me, give me a mandate. People voted for him to protest against it. Yes, he has his own views on Brexit, but those are we can't just say he got in because of student
No,
debt.
I didn't say that.
No, but people have done that. He got in because of student, what he said to the students. And whatever he's saying here, he's saying he's going to deal with it, things are going to change. And we might also argue that so far we've spent, 133 million on an election, 2 million on stopping Gina Miller from putting forward Article 50. There could be ways of getting more money towards student debt. And we're
towards £100 billion.
Well, 60 billion is going to be our Brexit divorce bill.
No, how do you know that?
Because we've got to pay something.
OK, well, again, I don't, given that we're a net contributor and have been for 40 years, that's a weird assertion as compared to money that is already owed or has already been accumulated. £100 billion is a huge amount of money. The European side of the Brexit negotiations, and again, we're talking Brexit on a student story, but the £100 billion that you're talking about here is a figure that we can accurately project because of students who are in education or are going to go into education. We are negotiating with our European partners and friends as we leave the European Union. One realistic outcome is nil as a payment, given the amount of EU assets. So just to assert that we're going to pay £60 billion in the context of this debate is weird.
Okay. I don't see how we can say it's nil. That the EU is already complaining that we're stalling. We have to pay something.
OK, I'm going to whiz you on to the front page of The Telegraph, and there's a story here about architecture. You'll have to explain it to me. I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Well, John Hayes, who has been a minister and a great survivor in government for quite some time, has joined in Prince Charles's kind of crusade against modern architecture. And he uses quite a novel point. He says, the reason that you see people put graffiti on so much modern building is effectively that, whilst he doesn't applaud graffiti, obviously, it's a telling way that you can tell what people have respect for. They don't go up and put graffiti all over a beautiful Gothic cathedral. They don't go up and put graffiti over a Romanesque institution. What they graffitize is concrete jungle.
Has he got a point, do you think?
Well, to be fair, I mean, he's saying that people draw graffiti on modern buildings because older constructions, people don't like them. I think there's an awful lot of graffiti. It's not my kind of thing, but there's a lot of graffiti art out there that is not just disrespect. People are actually expressing themselves on it. I don't like it, but many people are. But, I mean, there are a lot of art. When you say the National Gallery is a monstrous carbuncle, which of these modern buildings are quite so awful? And certainly you think that. I think that he's. I mean, I think Charles is being unfair. I think the minister is being unfair. I think that some of the.
I don't know. Royal Festival Hall, the Barbican, pull them down tomorrow. John Hayes.
That was controversial.
John Hayes here has the point about it isn't just that he agrees with Prince Charles. He wants to design facilities, so he's in charge of a lot of public infrastructure, like railway stations, in a more harmonious way.
OK, we've run out of time, I'm afraid, but I'm just going to squeeze in.
Women won the cricket. Fantastic.
Women won the
Amazing story.
And some fabulous photos on the front page of that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll revisit
Next
that
time.
at 11:30. Nice to see you both.
Thank you.